Hello everyone, Miss Carrie here from Miss Carrie's Creations. This month I've collaborated with Scrapbook.com's Christmas in July celebration, and I'm recording some Christmas memories. Today I'm going to show you how to use the contour tool in Cricut Design Space to create this title, and show you how to create this background with some Distress Oxide sprays and a stencil. For today's layout, I will be sharing a Christmas memory using this Christmas pattern collection and some matching cardstock. I've also grabbed this sweet Let It Snow stamp set and a stencil that I want to use on my page, along with some background paper and mixed media cardstock. On this layout, I also used some cut files from Scrapbook.com. Before I show you how to assemble the page, I want to share how I manipulated those SVGs in Design Space to create a multi-layer title. So I've already gone ahead and uploaded the two cut files from Scrapbook.com, and I've sized them to fit my project. The paper pad I'm using is an 8-inch paper pad, so I needed to make sure that none of the images were larger than that paper. When I cut out this title, it's going to be cut from pattern paper. But I want the word December to stand out on the page with white lettering. Instead of cutting this file out from white cardstock, I'm going to use the contour tool and remove all the cut lines from this image except for the letters. I'm going to start by selecting the design and duplicating the image. I'm going to select the duplicate image, then click on the contour tool in the lower right corner. I'm going to remove all of the images except the letters. You can click on the design itself or click on the images in the window on the right. When they are removed, the images turn a shade of gray, which let me know that it's going to be removed from the image. When I close this window, the only item left is the word December. I'm going to be cutting 4 images so that I can stack them on top of each other to create a thicker title. To save me some time, I'm going to add double-sided adhesive sheets to the cardstock before I cut them out. If you use adhesive sheets, you're going to want to mirror your images before cutting, then place the cardstock adhesive sheet side up on your cutting mat. I'm going to cut out all of my pieces and then I'll start creating the background for this layout. On this page, I wanted a soft gray background with a subtle texture, and I didn't have a pattern in my collection that I liked, so I decided to make my own. I'm using weathered wood and hickory smoke Distress Oxide sprays on some mixed media paper, and I'm just spritzing the ink randomly on the page. After adding some ink, I'm going to use my large collage brush and swipe it across the wet spray. This is going to create some brush strokes and give me a little bit of texture. After letting the spray dry a bit, I'm going to come back and add another layer of ink, and then I will swipe the brush across it again. This adds some lovely layers of texture to the design. Now I'm going to bring in some white gloss spray and spatter it onto the background. I'm going to let this sit a minute and mix with the sprays, and then I'll lightly run the brush across the paper. This time I have wet that brush just a little bit so that the water in the brush reacts with the Distress Oxide spray. This is going to create a bolder brush stroke in the background and remove a little bit of the ink. When this is dry, you can see all of the color and texture those layers created. Now I'm going to add some soft stenciling to the page. I have secured the winter floral stencil in place, and I'm using picket fence to create a chalk-like background. If you want a bolder look, you could use a dark gray or a pigment ink or some texture paste or gloss spray. I wanted this background to be soft and simple, so I'm going to use the Distress ink on my page. After moving the stencil around and adding some ink to the images, I have a subtle background. I'm going to let this sit a minute while I gather my cut files and my pattern paper, then I'll show you how to put the layout together. I have gathered all the pieces I need for this page. I have a white shiplap background, a lovely gray background we created with sprays, the cut file images, and some pattern paper pieces. I also have a tag cut from pattern paper, some pine boughs, and a pine cone that I cut using some dies. I'm going to lay the gray background onto the layout in the lower left corner. I have already distressed the edges of this. I'm also going to distress the edges of this Christmas light pattern. I like to use scissors to do this, but you can use an edge distresser if you have one. Now that the main pieces are down, I'm going to lay out the rest of the elements. I am noticing that this deep gray strip at the base doesn't show as much pattern as I would like, so I'm going to stamp some little house images onto it using a border stamp. I want to heat emboss this, so I'm going to do that off camera and then I'll show you what it looks like. I love the way this little border turned out with those heat embossed houses. While I was off camera, I also added some stitching around the edges of the blue paper. I'm going to adhere the scallop borders together and start laying down the elements in the background. I'm using a sanding block to distress the edges and rolling a few of the elements to give them some dimension. I added some foam tape to the back of the December background before I laid it down. I'm going to adhere it in place and then I'll add the letters for the title. I made 4 of these and I cut them from cardstock that was backed with an adhesive sheet. This makes it much easier to adhere them together, and the extra layers are going to bring some dimension to that title. You can see how thick these are when they're put together. I have added a little foam sheet behind the letters and now I'm popping them into place. Now I did save the centers of these letters when I cut it out from the green plaid, and I'll be adding those too, but you don't necessarily need to do this. I'm going to place the pattern paper centers inside each layer and press them down with a little tool. If you forgot to save the centers of your letters and you want some pattern behind that layer, just go ahead and glue a strip of pattern paper underneath. As I'm adding these to the page, you can see how much that title pops up. That white title is also helping the white stenciling in the background stand out a little more. Off camera, I added some stitching to the 2 borders before I adhered them in place. This not only matches the white embossing, it also creates almost a frame with that white title at the top. I'm going to adhere the tag in place with some thin foam tape and then tuck some of the pine boughs behind it. I will also be tucking some of these in the lower left corner behind the pine cone. I have used a sanding block on the edge of the patterned pine cone pieces to distress them a little, and I'm adding some foam tape in between each of the layers to give it some dimension. I cut the pine cone out from that soft brown pattern paper in the pattern paper pack. It makes it almost look like fabric applique with patterned paper. I distressed the edges because I wanted the edges to almost look like they had snow on the tips of the pine cone. If you wanted, you could also create this with some ink or some texture paste. I'm going to layer that pine cone in the lower left corner. This space here is going to have some journaling on it, so I don't want it to take up too much room, but I do want to create some nice little layers here. I am tucking a few pine boughs behind it to match the ones that I added behind the tag. The only spot of red I have on this page is the border. So I went ahead and backed that photo in some gray, and I've added a torn strip of pattern paper behind it. I am feeling like this page is a bit off balanced and that the upper corner needs a little something. So I'm going to fold that corner down towards the photo. Now, the pattern on the back of this does not match any of the other patterns on the page. So I'm going to bring in a few of those Christmas patterns I've already used and layer them in this corner. I'm going to use a pencil to trace the space, and then I'll cut these down to size and adhere them in place to make them look like they're part of the background. I'm going to be tucking some more pine boughs up in this corner to match the other branches I added. This is forming a nice visual triangle on the page. Off camera, I used this stamp to create a few little word elements. I heat embossed each one like I did with the border, using the same paper so that I created a nice visual element. The Memories tab is going to be tucked behind the photo, and the Merry and Bright phrase is going to be placed over the folded corner. I'm going to add a little red brad here. Even though it is from an outdoor collection, that checkered pattern goes so well with the other Christmas elements on the page. I'm going to go off camera and finish up a few other elements, and then I'll show you this finished layout. When you take a look at these close-up photos, you'll be able to see the heat embossed border and phrases I created with those two stamp sets. I love how the white heat embossing brings out the stenciling in the background and highlights the cut file title. The bits of stitching and layered pine cone create some lovely texture and a wonderful Christmas setting for the photo. I want to thank you for joining me today for another scrapbook page project. I have placed photos of this layout in the scrapbook.com gallery and on my website for you to view. If you have any questions about the project or the supplies I listed in the description below, feel free to post those in the comments. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I can't wait to see what you create.